When the Kansas Historical Society acquired Cottonwood Ranch, curator Don Rowlison found hundreds of glass negatives from photos taken by the original owner, John Fenton Pratt. From these come clear ideas of many parts of life, including one simple but important aspect: the clothes people wore.
Clothing is a cultural thing. We have, farmers that would dress differently than people in town. Cowboys would dress differently than sheep herders in some cases. Fenton Pratt's photographs are actually historical documents in themselves. You always heard the thing that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I could talk about clothing for a long time, but I don't have to, because we have the black and white photos on how the people dressed. Everything from people living on a farm where Fenton Pratt might have been passing through and caught him in more of a casual way, or some of the pictures where they're actually posed where absolutely everybody is dressed up, to a school picture of a sod school, which is a posed picture by all means, but you can see that the students there are farm kids. Some of them have holes in their trousers from working. You can pick out probably siblings in there with sisters that have different sizes but identical clothes, probably manufactured by their mother or maybe their grandmother. A small boy in the middle might have been a little wealthier, but is wearing knee socks and knickers. John Fenton Pratt's hobby of photography carries over into a lot of different disciplines and a lot of different historic information.
Much like Pratt's photographs, the study of historical garments can shed light on how people lived and who they were.
My name is Marla Day. I'm the curator for the Historic Costume and Textile Museum here at Kansas State University, and we are housed in the Department of Interior Design and Fashion Studies. The museum serves as a way for our students to gain both a historical perspective of where design has been, but also it's there as a source of information and inspiration for them to use in their practice. I think clothing is something that we take it for granted. It's very personal to us. We all choose every day what we're going to put on. So it's sort of our form of communication about ourselves to others.
Just as the clothes of historic eras can paint a picture of how people lived, clothing plays a role in sharing history when in the hands of committed reenactors.
My name's Kristin Keith. I'm a local resident of Larned, Kansas. I'm an antique dealer. I do estate sales, but my real passion is working as a volunteer out here. I do lots of living history for special event weekends. We are on Officers Row. This happens to be the quarters of Captain Nicholas Nolan, who is captain of the 10th Cavalry. I usually portray his wife, Annie. So it's a lot of work, first of all, which kind of overshadows the fun. It usually takes me about an hour to get dressed because I, unlike an officer's wife, don't have a lady's maid at home helping me get dressed. So by the time I do my hair and put on all the layers, it takes about an hour. But it is really fun to step back into another time period. I feel very at home in the 1860s. Our target year out here is 1868. So I, believe it or not, I'm very comfortable in these clothes. I've learned to move and sit and the kinds of things you have to do to be able to get around in them.
So you had work clothes and dress clothes, just as a lot of us have now.
What activity they were doing, that would dictate whatever dress they would be wearing.
A woman would typically have her work dress and then her good dress.
This is a special occasion dress. I like to wear this for the 4th of July or Memorial Weekend.
This one is just a plain front. It does have a flounce along the bottom, so it has a little bit of style. These would have been something that you would have worn every day.
This is a ball gown. The only dress that would have been worn with short sleeves and an open neck. All the other dresses would have had long sleeves and a high collar. If they were going to be gardening or Just at home, they might have calico on. So this is my informal dress. You can wear it with a hoop. You can just wear it with petticoats. When I wear this, I wear an apron over it just to reinforce that it is a work dress.
This one's more that classic prairie dress that we think about women wearing out on the plains of Kansas. It is a two-piece garment that was sewn together at the waistline.
So they would have had several of those types of dresses that they could easily wash. They probably wouldn't have worn the hoop under that. There would have been lots of petticoats because you would still have a full skirt, but not like this.
An item of dress that a lot of women might have adopted to wear out on the plains and under their skirts were something like this. These are bloomers, so they were very voluminous, but this allowed them to get on a horse and ride on horseback. Certainly would have made it much easier to work in the garden or to plow a field, but they would have worn this under a shorter length skirt. So the skirt might have ended below their knee.
Those dresses might have also been a little bit shorter if it's a work dress for practical reasons. You know, if you're out walking or gardening or something, when the skirts are long, it's easier to trip over them. And they also get caught in the wind. So a lot of women actually sewed weights into their hem to keep their skirts down from blowing in the wind, because these are like a sail. If it's a very windy day, they just kind of pick you up and carry you with it.
If she came out with additional dresses, it probably was with that good silk dress that was black, that was appropriate for funerals and things like that, that they might have to attend. For periods of mourning, they would have worn that.
Sarah Lister Pratt, her husband died in 1887, and she wore black clothes the rest of her life, always dressed in black.
Another accessory that women had would have been hats. You never would have left your house without your head covered. You would have had a straw hat for the summertime.
Looking at the sunbonnet here, this would have been standard dress for any woman whenever she went outside, or any young girl. Even boys would have worn, you know, some sort of hat on their head.
This is called a leghorn hat. It's wool.
You know, women prized, you know, a lighter complexion, and life on the prairie was hard, and so the sunbonnet really provided a way to keep that sun off of their face.
Well, the work clothes that the men wore were very durable work clothes. Maybe the fabric such as the Carhartt stuff today, a lot of those were cotton. They were kind of a heavy canvas type of thing, so they wouldn't snag and they would take a lot of wear and tear.
They would have had that one shirt, it might have been a slight calico print on it, and then they could have had Levi brand jeans, because those came out in 1876.
The men wore overalls, and the overalls were both waist overalls, which we would call jeans today, and bib overalls that they had the bib and the suspenders on. Those might be the clothes you pulled on over your better clothes when you did work like handling sheep with the hand that had a lot of lanolin in them. The sheep smelled bad, and instead of getting your better clothes greasy, you had these as chore clothes.
Again, like the women, they may have had a daily wear items that they wore with their shirt and pants, as well as their long underwear underneath, but then maybe a better pair of trousers and a dress shirt. Well, this is a men's suit. It was actually his wedding suit from 1889, and I only had the jacket and the pants, no shirt, but he would have had likely a white shirt that had a detachable collar on it, and the detachable collars allowed them to have a nice clean stiff collar. Really pretty fashion forward at the time, because it's more of a sack suit style versus the frock coat that the older gentlemen wore. So he was a young man probably when he got married, and his suit, but it was Robert Patrick Crawford's wedding suit from 1889. Whenever families did migrate west, they were encouraged to have a 2-year supply of clothing for the family. And so they needed to have a supply of fabrics with them that they could use for patching and repairs. If they had children, then they needed to have a way for those clothes to grow with the children. But also they needed to have family back home where they were coming from that could send them goods as well. And that was a way for them to get things, even though it might have been very slow for those pieces to arrive.
Out here, they would have had family members sending them fabric or dresses back east, wherever they were from. But a lot of it they would have brought with them or had mailed to them out here. If they didn't have access to that, it would have been homespun linen and wool.
You have to remember that we only had 4 fibers at the time. So we had cotton, silk, linen, and wool. A prairie dress would typically have about 4 yards of fabric in it. And so, in just the skirt. Probably another yard for each of the sleeves, believe it or not. So it took quite a bit of fabric to make that garment. They didn't have a lot of resources. It wasn't like they could just drive down to the store downtown. It was many miles probably back to town. It might have been several days' journey. But calico fabrics would have been available at the dry goods store. And that's just a plain cotton fabric that has a design printed on it. The other thing they might have relied upon was feed sacks, and feed sacks, 1860 was when they first started really relying on bags to ship grain or to mill flour into and that kind of thing. And women would see those empty bags and kind of think, there's a source of fabric. And they would turn that into many, many things for their family, whether it was sheets for the bed or blankets for them to keep warm with, or even fashioning it into garments. We have one garment that is made from feed sacks, dates to about 1870. The outer fabric, I believe, was dyed with Osage orange. And on the inside of the dress, you can still see the printed flour sack. And from Council Grove, Kansas, from the flour mill down there. But along these seam lines, it is hand sewn using the coarse thread that the feed sack was put together with. So they saved that thread and reused it, dyed it whenever they were dyeing this fabric so that it matched.
With John Fenton Pratt's photographs, you can see that the women's styles changed through the years. He subscribed for the Women in the House of women's magazines, several, 5 or 6 at a time.
There were fashion magazines as early as the 1820s.
The Peterson's magazine that I brought in, it's an example from 1880. So right about the time period we're talking about with Cottonwood Ranch, there were ready-made garments that women could order, but there were also illustrations for current fashions. You know, these might have been a little extreme to wear out on the prairie, but they could have modified that to where it might have incorporated either some of those stylistic elements like ruffles or buttons or the cut of the garment.
My favorite place to go they're called Goody's fashion plates. They're fashion plates from Paris that were produced in the 1800s. They were basically kind of forecasting what the fashion for the coming year would be. They were always ahead of the time. Plus out here on the frontier, we would have always been a couple years behind anyway. That's where this dress inspiration came from, was from a fashion plate.
This is a copy of a Delineator magazine from 1901, a little later. Delineator was published by the Butterick Pattern Company, but it too included patterns that women could send for so that, to work from a pattern is much easier. But I can tell you, these are nothing like the patterns that we have today. And the instructions for making them are not nearly as clear as what we have today to work with.
Trying to source out vintage or antique clothing in good condition is difficult. You can do it. They're usually very expensive, but they're also very fragile. So it's just not practical to try to do that if you're out here, you know, for hours and hours and moving around and talking to people or actually doing a scene, that kind of thing. It's just better to have something custom made. Some people with talent, so I do not have that talent. So I have a seamstress. She's amazing, but she has my measurements. I find a picture of a dress, like this fashion plate I found. I email it to her. She creates the pattern, creates the dress, and mails it back. I think she has done 5 dresses for me so far. So she's pretty amazing.
So this is a Mother Hubbard, and so it's one of those dresses that was a very serviceable dress. This one's made out of an indigo printed cotton calico. So this one is machine sewn, and the sewing machine would have been something of a luxury maybe a neighbor might have had. She probably would have allowed other friends to come over and use the sewing machine.
In this corner is a cabinet-looking affair. As we fold it out, a sewing machine pops out. There was no electricity, so there's a treadle on the bottom, kind of a pedal that goes back and forth. You can put both feet on it, which you pump that back and forth, and it runs the needle for the sewing machine up and down. Some of the extra attachments are pretty neat. You look at this square box. It's kind of a neat square box, but it unfolds, and all the attachments that go with the sewing machine to make buttonholes and braids and everything are in here. I do not know what all of these are for, so there's a mystery where somebody out there will know this, and someday they will tell me what they are, and then I only have to remember it.
Hey, Dawn, I can answer your question. We have a similar puzzle box as you do. So ours is an 1889 Singer treadle sewing machine wood puzzle storage box with attachments. And so as you can see, I've been myself trying to do some research on these. And so I've identified some of the pieces, and unfortunately our kit's not complete. Hopefully yours is. So I can tell you a little bit about them. This particular one is a ruffler. This one does shearing of fabric, so you can run it, the fabric through there, and it creates a stitch that sort of shears, ruffles the fabric, I'll say, and so that you can create some interesting details in garments. So that's what a lot of this is. And this one does tucks, and so it was common in women's petticoats for them to add tucks along the width of the skirt, and those tucks help create fullness in a skirt or in the petticoat so that it helped it to stand out more. So you didn't have to wear quite so many petticoats to get the fullness that you wanted. This one is a quilter, and so you would have been able to put this on as an attachment to help you attach bindings onto. So I have some of them identified. Some of them are still curious questions, so maybe I can help you out, Dawn.
Some of the magazines found at the site, of going through those, you could see where some of the magazines were concentrating. There might be a feature in every magazine on how you would modify your last year's style of dress into this year's style. And also the reuse of the clothing was, if there's a little bit left over, you made children's clothes out of the adult clothes.
Brochures and things like that did give you suggestions and guidelines for reusing garments. They would actually show you how to take a part of men's suit and make either something for yourself or for your children.
My mother used to cut up my dad's khaki pants and things and make my clothes out of those and trim them with red rickrack. She'd save all the good parts that hadn't been worn out. She could make anything. Didn't ever use a pattern. She just would make it.
But nothing was wasted. You would have a scrap bag that you would have kept bits and pieces that if you needed to go in and repair, the child ripped, perhaps a little hole in their dress, you could go in and repair that.
They used what they had. You didn't go to the store and buy things. People used what they had. And Jenny and Hilda, we called her Auntie, not Jenny, she could do beautiful handwork, embroidery work. She embroidered little roses on a dress that I had. My mother made my sister and I each a dress, and she embroidered little roses on the yoke of that dress for each of us. And I still have my dress.
What people wore does give us a picture of their occupation and the society.
Why is it important to look at what people wore? I think when we're looking at it in terms of what we save and what we keep those garments that have meaning to us. It was, a christening gown. It's a confirmation dress. It's a graduation piece that you wore.
I didn't have a dress from the store until my 8th grade graduation.
I was going to say, I
That was
think
my
that,
very first
and I had a
dress.
taffeta blue dress on my 8th grade graduation.
First dress I ever had.
I still have mine too.
Do you really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wish I still had mine.
Me too.
And I can also remember walking up around by Pratt's and coming down the railroad track when I wore my first pair of pants my trousers to church.
Is that right?
I rebelled. I wasn't going to wear a dress down there, so I had to walk. And then I was mortified after I got to church. Okay?
Wow.
So you were kind of a trendsetter then?
Sure.
Then perhaps it's a wedding dress, or if you're, the wedding suit. Those are all important life events that help establish who we were at that time period.
And I also have a coat that my mother made from a coat that Jenny wore when she came, or she brought from England when she was a young person. And, you couldn't acquire nice fabrics and things back in the late 30s, early 40s. It was wartime, it was Depression time. Auntie and Hilda gave my mother this black and white check houndstooth coat. And my mother cut it up and made me a coat out of it with a little red velvet collar, and I still have that coat.
I think we can relate to those stories because all of us have these stories in our past. Perhaps they've been forgotten by a particular family, but whenever you can read about somebody else's family and what they experienced, then it helps you understand that generation of people. I'll tell you the story about this piece. This is a child's bodice. It's actually from about 1840, and it has a history that started in Germany. I went on this journey with this piece and found out that the family had come from Germany, that this was Caroline's little bodice. Caroline had died in 1855. Louise, who was her sister, didn't ever know Caroline, but Louise had taken care of this bodice because it was her only remnant to that sister. Now, Louise lived in Quinter, Kansas, and she gave this piece to our historic costume collection, and so we had this little bit of history. But to think that Louise had kept it for all those years and it had meant so much to her, and that she gave it to us to entrust us with it. And now we get to tell its story. And so I think it's important to keep those stories active and to understand them so that as we go forward, I think it helps make us better people. Gives us a broader understanding of who we were to know where we're going.